Welcome to Noble Warrior. My name is CK Lin. This is where I interview entrepreneurs, practitioners about how they move from finite games to infinite games and pursue a life of greater purpose and joy. Today we have Jeff Gomez. He's the CEO of Starlight Runner Entertainment. He's a visionary transmedia producer, or some may say an OG in the transmedia space. He has worked with names you know: Disney, Sony, Mattel, shaping iconic franchises like Avatar, Pirates of the Caribbean, Transformers, etc. So I'm so excited to have him here. Thank you so much for being here on Noble Warrior, Jeff.
Fantastic, CK. I'd love to talk to you.
So there's many places we can begin, but since I just got back from the Amazon jungle and I was at the place where James Cameron got a lot of his inspiration from to make the movie The Avatar. I think there's some interesting parallels between what I learned from the ayahuasca conference and James Cameron himself, and also people that you've talked to, indigenous people specifically, their response to the Avatar movie. Um, why don't we start there?
Sure, sure. Just a little background. My specialty is in narrative, and I consult as a specialist in understanding how narrative works on different media platforms. So I know the difference between a video game story, a feature film story, a streaming series story, all that sort of thing, because I have a background in uh, global narrative studies. And
So
I,
pause real quick. Let me
Mhm.
just make sure I understand.
Sure.
What I got from what you just said is the specific type of story is suitable for that particular medium. Is that accurate recap of?
That's absolutely, correct.
Okay,
Each
great.
medium has a very specific format.
Okay.
A movie is 2 hours long, so you need to get the story done, fairly quickly. A sitcom, you've got 26, 28 minutes, and they're structured, differently as well. So, um I'm good at understanding that, but also how those narratives can interplay with one another in a kind of almost symphonic way, and that creates these kind of story worlds, these transmedia universes that if you love the intellectual property, you can spend a lot of time with it and enjoy it in different media. So that accounts for things like the Marvel universe and how it manifests in these movies and TV shows and video games and so forth. Harry Potter and Star Wars, these big global franchises. And that's my specialty. I consult on those franchises. Avatar was a situation where I was called in to help document the universe of Pandora and the greater universe that surrounds Pandora for 20th Century Fox and James Cameron and James Cameron's producer John Landau. The reason I would do that is not because they don't have that information on hand, but the information is scattered across all these different divisions and so forth. So I kind of bring it all together so that it is a tool set that can be used to create prequels, sequels, sidequels, games, merchandise, licensed products, novels, comics, and things like that.
So pause real quick. I want to make sure again, right? This is from my understanding.
Sure, sure.
So essentially, you have a huge story, lots of teams, hundreds of people, probably, maybe thousands, who knows? And then your job is to essentially collect and distill what makes the movie or the asset, the DNA of it all. So that way, when you take it to a different medium, say theme parks or video games or whatever, you have the most distilled DNA of the thing, so it doesn't, as they say, play a game of telephone, right? Dilute, like it doesn't
Exactly.
doesn't even look like the original thing because it's so diluted. Is that accurate?
CK, it is, but we go a step further.
Uh-huh.
What is the essence of this story world and these characters? To be able to capture what what it purely is, so that creators can be sure to infuse that purity into the content that they're creating, so that the end user has an authentic experience of the world on that media platform. That's very important to us, and that's where it's why we're paid well, and are considered experts in the world, because we're able to get at that essence.
So here's the question, right? So as I just came back from the ayahuasca conference, I interact with shamans, right, spiritual leaders. One of the things, and I'm trained as a PhD scientist, so it's like basically the total opposite. One is about spiritual transmission to get the vibes of the thing, right? To really understand the esoteric of the esoteric, the spirit of whatever it
Sure.
is that we're talking about. The other one is reductionist, right? Systematic distillation of like push this lever, this thing happens. I'm curious, how does your mind think when trying to distill into the essence of a story?
Um, a lot
Another
of
big
that has
question, I know.
no, it's a wonderful question. It's a good one, and it's rarely asked. Um, the um, the cross section of story that I've studied dates back all the way, to very near prehistoric times. So understanding the emergence of narrative first as an instructive tool for survival. I need to communicate to my child what to do once they leave the cave, um, or else the child will die. So, verbalizations and paintings, drawings, and things like that were helpful in allowing for survival to persist. And then, as our brains evolved, the understanding of how things work, and why things are the way they are, um, contain kind of the building blocks of these more sophisticated narratives that have emerged. This is a crude approximation, but the notion of archetypes, the notion of the deep inner wishes and desires of a person, which are common all across the world, are things that we kind of categorize, for lack of a better word, and search for when we are trying to determine those essences.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson, I was listening to him speaking about the importance of, because he's a biblical scholar of sorts, right? So he talked about the importance of archetypes. And at first glance, archetypes are very simplistic, shall we say. I mean,
Mhm.
my perception of archetypes are very simplistic, but then he
Yeah.
said, "Hey, don't dismiss it so easily because they're simplistic. There's a reason why these stories, biblical stories, lasted for thousands of years. This is essentially the human species' attempt to distill down essentially the universal rules and laws of how what makes a life successful, quote unquote. I don't know if you have anything to add, but I just wanted
Look,
to.
TK, you're absolutely right. I too, feel that the notion of archetypes is a hyper simplification. And when you look at the primordial inspiration for archetypes, there is a very rich and highly sophisticated understanding of reality, of the psyche, and so forth, that are the elements that myself and my team truly learn from in order to help to make these determinations accurately. We try not to guess. There is a kind of molecular component aspect of narratives that is important for us to understand so that we are not, giving our clients our opinions. We are being as accurate as possible to these foundational elements of story.
So I'm gonna nerd out on this just a little bit more. I'm a
Yeah.
nuanced guy, so if you don't mind, I'm gonna humor my curiosity for 1 second. Human beings are by just are hugely complex, right? You can tell a story about CK Lin, and then for simplicity's purposes, you can categorize me into some kind of archetype, right?
Right.
And similarly with these type of characters, the type of characters that I like, they're not ultra simplistic. Superman is very simplistic, right? But Batman is very complex, but just
Right.
for comparison purposes.
Mhm.
So then how do you again, trying to describe something with very limited number of words and sentences to describe something that's so complex, especially, and then also create a whole universe. You know what I mean? Like your words are
Well,
only so
you
limited.
are you are speaking to my anguish, CK, my anguish, because early on in my career, when approached by a company like Disney or 20th Century Fox, they would ask these questions, and I would hand them uh, these kind of sophisticated and complex responses. In my mind, the more information I give you about your characters and your universe, the better off you'll be. And the feedback that I got was, um, we're not paying you to dump your entire brain on us. We're paying you for the bullet points. Please move away. This was an email that I received. Please move away from an academic approach to our intellectual property.
All right, no point taken.
You know, uh, by the way, James Cameron was actually quite different from that. In working with him on Avatar, he had a stunning understanding of the deeper aspects of story and the mythic elements underneath the stories that he told. So I really appreciated that about him. It made conversations with him fascinating, um, and arguments with him very dangerous.
Okay, so say a little bit more about that because is that again, I'm gonna nerd out on this a little bit because I don't know him personally, and his movie obviously huge success, commercial success, but also embedded in it, well, a universe of possibilities, but embedded in it, what I care about personally is the moral lessons. Like he did a really good job in balancing the commercial, like the simplistic storyline, but also the hidden, the moral stories, the lessons effectively, the insights.
Sure,
If you really look, you can find it in the symbolisms, in the dialects. Oh, anyways, so
sure,
in the
sure.
minds of James Cameron, so do you think that's what it takes? Have the brain capacity to really embrace the complexity of it all? Is that unique to James, or is that all the ultra successful directors that you interacted with? They all have that.
There's all of the others that I've worked with, and then there's James Cameron.
Okay.
So a lot of them are extraordinarily intuitive.
Mhm.
So they are a kind of in a flow state and tapping into our collective consciousness without necessarily academically understanding what it is that they're
Mhm.
doing.
Mhm. Mhm.
But Cameron does have a a fairly specific academic background in these kinds of narratives, and especially mythic narratives. One of the aspects that we worked on was the understanding of the psyche of the Navi,
Mhm.
and trying to discern the way they thought, how their thinking differed from human thought, particularly the kind of human thinking that led to the crisis that Earth is facing, um, that triggers the adventure. And if you look at the way that the Navi communicate with one another, there are some indigenous components and philosophies to the way that they operated. And I was fortunate enough to document a lot of that and to be able to kind of extrapolate it for the production and for the greater franchise. And uh, what's fascinating to me is that there were disparities between the foundational philosophy of these Navi characters and the way that they responded to uh, the attacks on them, and the way that they were resolving their issues with the humans. And um, and I asked Cameron about that, and at the time he wasn't particularly interested in addressing that with me. And later, because I do a lot of consultation in Brazil, um, I got to encounter some of those indigenous people who you may have encountered, and I asked them what they thought because, of course, everyone asks me about Avatar, and and they said, it was really incredible. Some of them had actually seen the film. It was an amazing film. We in some ways it seemed very real to us, um, but we were disappointed by the way that these stories are resolving themselves.
Mm,
Um, they communicate, the Navi communicate a sense of ontological psyche, an ontological state of being. I am here with you now. We are we understand the past, but we are divorcing ourselves emotionally from the past so that we may start anew right now, so that I don't carry the trauma and the burden of that past into my present and future discussions with you in hopes that we can reconcile our differences and be able to solve the problem without things like violence. And that was not depicted in the film. There was very little effort displayed by the Navi in attempting to do this. You know, they had already lost their temper before the movie started, and therefore, um, uh, it's just an ongoing conflict, and whoever is strongest kind of wins in the end. Uh, and that moved on to movie number two. I have a feeling movie number three is going to start evolving that psychology, and I'm looking forward to that.
mm. So, I went to an ayahuasca conference where all of the different tribes from Mexico, Peru, Colombia, Brazil, USA, and they were having a discussion ultimately center around indigenous sovereignty, um, but with the specific topic of ayahuasca. But
And
really, the core of it, the spirit of it, is sovereignty. How do we reclaim our sovereignty in
sure,
the eyes of the law, politics, economics, and then Westerners appropriating their culture, their ayahuasca, then so on and so
yeah,
on. So I got to see a little bit of behind the scenes how they resolve their own, differences of opinions and reconcile innovation, proposal, policy as a way to unite together to try to solve this. And I want to circle back to your earlier point about using narrative as a way to solve cultural global issues, so to speak. Because in my mind, if why we can let's just use whatever they were discussing over there as a case study, right? Um, we can look at it from a very tactical point of view, the law, the cultural appropriation, the addictions and the encroachment of drug traffickers, etc. So there's many, many different issues that they're talking
Sure.
about. But I think for me, a outsider, right, uneducated, uninformed, just all that, just a little disclaimer, right? I'm not claiming to know the answer. For for me, the core of it is the preservation of the culture. How do we essentially have people outside of that region care about them? Because once you
Mhm.
have people caring about them, and then they'll have the resource, the political support, the economic support, right? The
Sure.
right that they so desire. Um, don't have an answer, but I think that's the way I'm looking at it from an outsider.
Did you, witness moments of reconciliation between significantly different perspectives and opinions?
Um, so how do I answer that question? So there's definitely a lot of difference of opinion, how to approach it. Some advocates for reparation, some advocates for, hey, let's build coalition, with Westerners and so on and so on, right? So there's not,
Sure.
but ultimately, and then also a funny aside, during the ayahuasca conference, people have the option to drink ayahuasca
Mhm. Mhm.
during the experience. So for me, that was um, one novel, but two, a very innovative way to build consensus. Because I don't know if you've ever had ayahuasca experience, but ultimately our perceptivity and sensitivity to the space broadens, our bandwidth broadens.
That's right.
So once you drink it, then you can not only hear the words, feel the emotion, but really sense the overall energy of the room. And obviously, these are people who are very experienced with the medicine, so their sensitivity is already high, and imagine them taking another level, right? So
Sure.
the reason why I can't really give you a like here's an answer is everything's so subtle over there. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's things that I don't even see, I don't even feel that they are reconciling amongst themselves. Does that kind of
Right.
give you a picture of what I
100%,
experienced?
100%. Besides the Hollywood stuff, we deal with, geopolitical, situations and crises, national crises, and things like that. We consult with government and non-government organizations around the world, and uh, you call us in when you're looking for some kind of consensus, a way to reconcile, and that's where um, digging down deep into not just a commonality of purpose, but a cultural unity is extremely valuable because you can take those foundational elements, those story elements that describe value systems that tend to be common for lots of very different peoples, and use them to allow for people to coalesce around purpose to get the job done. Then some of them can advocate for the changing of laws, while others can march in the streets and generate entire movements. And still others can create art or other kinds of works that are designed to elevate people and enlighten them and so forth. And it all kind of works in tandem. Those are remarkable experiences that I've had that aren't nearly done enough these days. In fact, quite the opposite. Is happening in our society, unfortunately, and I'm really hoping we change course.
I really appreciate you broadening this conversation beyond the Hollywood stuff, right? Because well, you're an OG transformative and transmedia person, so obviously that's what you're known for, and I'm sure you have a lot of conversation there. If you don't mind, can you give us some examples? Because what I'm gathering is just super cool. I love that you do that for indigenous people, specifically. How do you help them distill down what's their core narrative? And then also, how do you help them, okay, essentially transmedia, right? How do you, create art around it or documentary around it or social media around it or go out and march on the street about it? How do you distill and then disseminate?
Well, let's use an indigenous project that we worked on. We were called to Australia. I had done a series of talks about transmedia in entertainment, but I always end with a little kind of geopolitical statement. And they said, "Well, can you put your money where your mouth is here?" And I did, and I went to the west coast of Australia and examined a crisis among the Aborigine and Torres Strait Island indigenous people there because they were not making it through university. These are very large numbers of young people who were failing um, almost immediately after entering as freshmen into higher learning. And it seemed like nothing could be done to get them to push through. Uh, a lot of them came out of rural Australia, the desert, distant places. So we examined um, we wanted to know why. The university system there gave us their explanation, which was that, frankly, it it put these people in a negative light. You know, there's an intrinsic laziness about them. There is an unwillingness to adapt to new environments. All these sorts of things. The slightest slight will have them withdraw from a social situation. Um, they didn't understand what the anything more than something that's didactically told to them was hard for them to comprehend. And immediately, I suspected the other issues, and said, "Well, I got you. Can I go to them and examine them?" Um, to make a long story short, I failed to communicate effectively with the indigenous people in southwestern Australia, and retreated for months. At which point, I dedicated myself to studying their deeper culture, their mythology, their narratives, their belief systems, and they were different from anything I'd ever seen before, a CK, really, really striking. Um, None of the applications of the Campbellian hero's journey applied to their narrative systems, their thought processes, nothing. Um, and I studied the pedagogy within their tribal systems and made some startling discoveries. I went back there. I talked to their leaders about this and was accepted. It wasn't easy.
What
And
what what was the thing that made them accept you?
um, what I said to them is what I'm saying today to many, many people. Um, uh, their way of communicating, their way of understanding the universe is the way of our future. We are heading back there.
Mhm.
Here's how. Everything in our contemporary narratives are conflict driven. Um, I am good, you're bad. one way or another, protagonist, act, antagonist, and it's like this. Um, and the most sophisticated version of this is that circular hero's journey, the call to adventure, the refusal of the call, threshold guardians, getting the boon, killing the beast, all that sort of stuff. And it's what runs Hollywood, and it's what runs everything that's kind of familiar to us. Um, our leaders come up to us, CK, and say, "Only I can save you. Only I can save you." In that indigenous culture that I studied, Aborigines in Australia, there's no such thing as any of that. Instead, their narratives are networked. Any one person can talk to anyone else. Signs and symbols. Reading is not a big deal for them. They don't they don't read much because they are in tune with the land. They understand exactly where they are at all times, and they navigate. They crystallize what it is that they're looking for, and they go get it. And in their stories, there isn't some monster or some evil dude who's standing in the way. They're much more concerned with the properties of survival and the properties of contributing to one another in a shared perception of the universe. So when I was able to go back to them and communicate that, they said, "You're the guy."
They
Um,
felt understood by you.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Mm,
And that made it much easier to understand them,
mm,
and to create programs that would allow for them to enter into an alien environment, which that's what a big old university is
mm.
to their young people, and give them the tools that they needed to navigate and communicate, and support one another as a network within those environments. And the results were truly remarkable, astounding. Student retention went has gone up every year since that program was implemented, and it's now spreading across all of Australia.
Oh, that's beautiful. If you don't mind drilling on maybe the toolkit that you offer these students, is it a series of narratives slash stories? Is it like, hey, here's how you can use just distributive network to support each other, to play this game that Westerners have, even though you don't really particularly care. I don't know exactly what you said, but what is the tools in the toolkit that you offer?
The first tool, CK, is kind of a almost a sad one, because I had to address a number of these students en masse, and the first message was, "No one is coming to save you. This institution, the government of Australia, you know, the things are perpetual because they're perpetuated. So you must save yourselves, the way that you have always saved yourselves, which is to stay a network. Despite any efforts to break you apart and isolate you, you must stay a network, and you must be a movement, and and you must recognize that the tool that was used to subjugate your people, and it's a tool that's used to subjugate all kinds of people all over the world, is shame. Is shame.
Mm,
So it's a devastating psychological tool that is passed down from generation to generation, and is used by leaders of huge countries, even huge nations, even today. So how do we transcend shame? How do we free ourselves of that intergenerational trauma.
Mm.
Um, uh, so the tool set that we gave them had to do with thinking ontologically. I am, I am, I be, and my being is free of shame. And if I'm feeling haunted by those emotions or provoked by the language of the university or the language of the government, I'm going to go to one of my peers and talk about it, so that my peers, who have all exercised their ability to free themselves from shame, can counsel me and remind me to persist. Okay, and this manifested in all kinds of little ways on college, on university campuses, in Australia, and I wish we could do it everywhere, because it was highly effective.
Well, number one, congratulations, and really happy that you were able to help those students to free themselves from intergenerational shame that stops them academically. But I'm sure shame, will veer off its head beyond academia. They're just, yeah, it's intergenerational for a reason, right? So what I'm hearing also, you understood their cosmology to the best of your ability. You gotten permission effectively from the elders to
Yes,
share a toolkit that help them with shame as the arch nemesis, so to speak, right? And then you offer them ways, a tool to free themselves from the shame, and then also a peer network. So should anyone fall off or feel that negative emotion, they can
bring them
use,
back.
go back, bring them back, and then with the continual, training and usage of such a tool, they can become stronger by a network effect that way. Is that
A
accurate
a
understanding?
brilliant summary of what I'm taking too many words to describe. Also, by the way, CK, I have to insist that all I did was ask the right questions. They furnished me with the tools. You know, I was able to forge what they gave me into little documents and little procedures that I then gave back to them. So they recognize themselves in my communication. I don't go places to assert my narrative on theirs. That's rude. It's their narratives that are saving themselves. So it's I don't want to take too much credit.
As a very wise Chinese philosopher, Lao Tzu once said, "The bad leaders tell people what to do. The good leader empower, well, the greatest leader ultimately cultivate or invoke the answer they have within themselves, and they say we let ourselves." So that's a beautiful illustration of what Lao Tzu mentioned thousands of
That's
years ago.
100%. I can only wish that more of our leaders understood that.
Yeah,
It, it's so much better, CK, when we love each other.
yeah,
It's so much better than it is this other feeling, this apprehension, this anxiety, this hatred. What? How is this a good way to live? You know, it makes me deeply sad because it's so much better the other way.
yeah. Well, I mean, some may say the business that you're in is to help people invoke such a positive emotion, right? All we need is love, yes, and you're right,
Okay,
how
so
do
here's
we,
where now
incentivize.
you're upsetting me, SEK.
Huh?
This is an issue that I have.
Go ahead.
Our narratives, our popular narratives, are driven on harsh conflict, um, are driven on the assertion of right on wrong, um, are driven, have been driven in recent years on the anti-hero. Okay, someone who uh, we glorify because of how violent they are, or how mean they can be, and yet they're a little bit charming. So so we buy it. We love Tony Soprano, don't we? Um, uh, so you know, that gives rise to the acceptability of those kinds of behaviors offline, outside of fantasy, right? Same with the belligerence of behavior on social media. It's all fun and games to say terrible things to one another while we're anonymous. Um, but now we kind of have permission to do and say terrible things outside of social media in real world environments, and it seems to be just fine. Um, and and that is a movement of the framework through which we are viewing reality. And it's a the last time that happened, and the time before, and the time before, and the time before, it didn't end well.
No.
So so um, so my point, CK, is that we need to tell stories that model differently. We need to think about um, uh, new narrative modalities that celebrate dynamic reconciliation. And I say dynamic instead of just plain reconciliation because with the art and skill of creators, we can make reconciliation aspirational. We can make it cool. We can make it exciting to watch. And so our brain functions can continue to look at the screen or read the book or what have you. Um, I'm strongly advocating systemic narrative, collective journey, as I call it, and I'm advocating in Hollywood and elsewhere for us to um, uh, uh, draw a map for people, particularly young people, to show them that there's a different way of being than shooting people in the head and punching bad guys through walls.
You're right. Yeah. So by the way, I'm an advocate for what you're describing. There's it's how do I articulate this? The simplest way to resolve conflict is let me be stronger than you and beat you to pulp, right? And that's like the most simple story, so to speak, right? And
The
then
removal of soft power,
there you go,
uh,
right?
the the allowance to just have hard power. Mhm.
So to me, the much more there. Okay, so there's a beautiful book called Power versus Force. I don't know if you ever read it. So
No, no.
force is simple, like let me just force you to comply, and but then once you remove the force, revenge and all those things happen. Anyways, you're the story expert, so I don't want to butcher it too
No, no,
much.
no.
But then there's power. Martin Luther King Jr., nonviolent, Gandhi, nonviolent movement, and then they were much, much more influential instead of using sheer force to ask, Great Britain to comply, as an example, right?
Sure, sure.
So, agree with you. And are there, since you understand the mechanics of using narrative as a force for good, effectively, as a tool for good, effectively, are there people who are doing that, to your point, to solve this systemic degradation of using force instead of using what was the first phrase that you use? Dynamic
Reconciliation.
reconciliation. Yes. Are there people who is really good at using narrative as a force for good?
Well, there have been several recent movies that have come from the Disney company that illustrate my point. There is the Moana
Hmm.
film. There is Encanto,
Hmm.
um, and some of the more recent Pixar films like In and Out
Hmm.
and so forth, which are illustrating um, systems that have a flaw in them that some people are able to take advantage of, and other people are suffering from.
Mhm.
Those narratives involve the intersection of characters, and a kind of dynamic series of reconciliations. So there is some conflict there, but the narrative is designed to resolve itself, to focus on the flaw, which often is things like trauma, and in doing so, it allows for even the antagonist, or the person taking advantage of the flaw, to come to terms with the situation, and to be able to rejoin the community as a vital and powerful member. I really appreciate those kinds of stories, and we are seeing a little bit more of that emerge.
Are there So I love Soul, I love In and Out 1 and 2, I love Encanto, like, all those are beautiful stories that
Mhm.
I really appreciate because it's it's well told, right? Of something actually In and Out itself is a very complex idea, and in Soul as well, very complex idea, but simply said to be able to even like a five-year-old would understand, like, "Oh, okay, this is how these very complex things could work." Are there
Mhm.
things that you see as an opportunity to your earlier point, all the politicians, how people behave, trolling each other online? It's now becoming normalized to be able to say nasty things to each other in a
Sure.
very public way. Are there cultural narrative solution that you see that could bring us back to a more civilized, more evolved, way of communicating with each other?
Well, you know, unless we tip over into fascism, unless we really kind of lose it altogether, there is a kind of pendulum
Mm,
that swings back and forth,
right.
in the United States, dating back a couple hundred years. We see these moments of swinging from far left to far right, kinds of mentalities. Um, but um, Frankly, one of the most compelling, um, you know, possibilities that lie before us is the use of social media.
Mm,
Um, right now, only in social media am I seeing direct commentary about systemic problems, and how we as a people need to focus on the flaws of those systems, as opposed to vilifying our leaders, or the people who are opposing our leaders. Although there was a very dark, um, a source of the conversation, or catalyst to the conversation, one aspect of the conversation, uh, being the shooting of the health insurance
mhm,
CEO.
mhm,
Um, it certainly did spark this notion, which transcended left and right, or up and down. Um, Most people can agree that our healthcare system is deeply flawed, a- and that something ought to be done about it. And this generated spontaneous, self-organized efforts to do just that. You know, and I don't think
Actually,
any.
I'm not familiar what transpired from that because
Oh,
I yeah, if you can educate me a little bit about what transpired, really.
well, there were some laws that were slowly making their way through the system, for example, that were accelerated as a result of a public pressure to to force health insurance companies to reconsider the way that they were treating their customers. And some of those, a couple got passed. You know, I wish that that more was made of all that, because it's kind of complicated and hard to understand. People should know that it wasn't Luigi. It was a whole bunch of people who, organized themselves and pushed for these things that made some of our representatives push and pass those things. But more can be done, and that is not going to be the result of some shooting. It has to be the result of people understanding the complexity of our system, and to be able to um, rely on fundamental values. We all want to be healthy. We all don't want to pay our life savings to save our lives. Um, you know, um, let's do something about this. It can only be no one is coming to save us. It can only be us who demand this of our government.
So, as someone who can see the mechanics working, right? The narratives, the villains, the heroes, the different medium. I'm curious, are you and not to put you on the spot, but I'm kind of asking you in a public way. What do you see as what is to be done from your perspective?
In terms of which,
Well, you have a desire to use narrative as a way as a force for good, right? Or do you have a calling or a project or a direction or a wish for more people like you gathering to help specific thing that's in need, or I don't know what specific, like, what's
or,
the
or no,
dream? Like, giving your ability, what's the dream effectively?
I'm living the dream, CK. I'm doing things beyond any comprehension that I could have had when I was a young person. So what does that mean? That means looking at a project like Pirates of the Caribbean or Avatar or Ultraman, which I'm working on right now, or a project that I'm working on for the Walt Disney Company, which is of my own invention, and putting um, uh, various I call them narrative subroutines, um, code. What's the code? What is the wisdom? The not the prac the practical steps that the character makes, which are often quite common in stories. Beginning, middle, and ends. The process of you know defeating the villain and getting the treasure. Um, that interests me less than the wisdom that is gathered along the way that I can take as a fan and apply to my own life, right? Captain Jack Sparrow balances nobility and savagery. All he wants is freedom. He says he's a pirate. He claims he wants rum and treasure, but what he really wants is to be free. That is free of the regimented British aristocracy that's trying to destroy him, and free of the wild savagery of the open sea and the Caribbean uh, islands. He balances between those two, and in doing so establishes a state of grace. I grew up in violence. I grew up in a chaotic environment. Um, so if I can glean this even subconsciously from Jack's story, I can say to myself, I don't have to succumb to savagery, and I don't have to bind myself to all the hundreds of rules of the aristocracy in order to feel free and enjoy my life. Um, how awesome is that? You know, um, that's a lesson that even I took away from Pirates of the Caribbean. So if I can make sure that that code is infused in different ways, different messages in different intellectual properties that are then disseminated to millions of people, then I'm doing my job, you know, then I am making some small, and it's tiny, but it's a little something, contribution to moving us um, out of this polarized, and fiercely destructive conflict into something that maybe allows for us to level up as a race.
Yeah. Let me so thank you for doing that. Um Beautiful articulation of Jack Sparrow, I've never heard it phrase it like that before. Um I love movies. And if I can my dream job is to be able to watch movies all day kind of a thing, right? If I ever just I don't need to work, like I just love watching movies. There's
Mm.
Yeah, I'm a addict for good stories, right? And I think stories is quite universal, right? Hence why Hollywood is multi-billion dollar industry and people just love to be entertained and be inspired, right?
Sure.
However, as a coach, one of the things I distinguish is inspiration alone isn't quite sufficient. You needs to have um, tools to be able to say, all right, I'm inspired to do that. Here's what I can begin today so I can level up accordingly. So I'm curious to know your perspective as someone who is, I'm getting a gist of who you are, Jeff. You're also about positive change, behavior shift and all those
Sure.
things as well, right? So so is inspiration sufficient? And then people would just
No.
figure it out by themselves? Like, "Oh, yeah, Jack Sparrow, like, freedom, great." And
Sure.
then
Yeah. No.
tomorrow,
No.
let me go back,
You're
you know?
absolutely right. I'm crazily fortunate to have been able to glean those things from the stories I was told from when I was watching Sesame Street in the 1970s. Uh, I understand that that's a little bit unusual. So the other thing that I would recommend to storytellers, if we're staying in the storytelling realm, is please make it tougher, make it more specific. What exactly do our characters need to do in order to affect this change, in order to achieve enlightenment and uh, and level up themselves and make the world a better place? Some of the complaints that you're hearing about these big global franchises, the Star Wars and Marvel, even Harry Potter, is that it all comes too easy to these characters. Ray is able to defeat a dark Jedi in the first movie of the new Star Wars series, right? And the 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 achievement of experience and mastery, um, the pursuit of excellence, is missing. I can't tell you how many times I've seen variations on if you just believe, you could have everything you want. Right? You've seen that too. If you just believe, or it's okay. You don't have to be perfect. It's all right that you've made all these mistakes. Don't worry about it. And what that does is it does not equip the audience with the tools they need to achieve very difficult things. And we are in a difficult situation. And I feel that a couple of generations have been disempowered uh, uh, by this kind of uh, a comfort cushion. The I call Harry Potter the spooky house, because Harry is sitting in a little spook house chair and he's winding his way through the the dark mansion, and things come out and go boo, but there's never a sense that he's really genuinely in danger, never a sense uh, that he is injured and deeply wounded by the things that are unfolding, and his level of cleverness is not quite up to par with regard to dealing with all of these things and applying them. I want more for our audiences today.
So actually, I have a parallel I want to draw. Have you ever heard the phrase of uncanny valley or something like that?
Sure.
What? Okay, great. So here's the. I'm with you. Actually, I advocate for what you believe, but for the sake of the audience, like let me be the counter argument there. So
Sure.
pushback,
Sure.
right?
Mhm.
Life is hard as it is. I go watch movies so that I can escape from the difficulties and the challenges and the realism, the grittiness, and all the stuff I don't want to deal with. So don't remind me of how miserable my real life is as a pushback, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Um, Look, I like airheaded nonsense too. um, but CK, we got to, there is enjoyment in achievement. We can't forget that our real pleasure must be derived from witnessing remarkable navigation, witnessing remarkable achievements. You know, that's what myth was all about. That's what the early stories were about. Um, that's what stories were about in the 1970s. So things have softened a lot because there's a theory that we don't want to scare off the audience, so we're going to make it softer and softer and softer. And you know what that does? It removes the curriculum within our entertainment. And when you remove curriculum, CK, including within education systems around the world, including everywhere, you take away the lesson plan and all you're left with is cotton candy, and you'll get diabetes. It we will stop thinking effectively if that's all we've got. I appreciate escapism, but I feel it's a responsibility to code the escapism with ways to maintain liberty,
Yeah. I
agency.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I do men's work, so a big part of what you're describing is that claiming one's agency, one's responsibility, one's willingness to do the work to earn the superpower that we so desire, right? I can't just gift you wisdom. There's no, as much as I want to, I can't gift it to you. I can
I
gift
agree.
you health. I can gift you good relationship with your people in your life. I can't gift you spiritual connection. There is no enough willingness for me to give that to you. It's earned, unfortunately and fortunately.
That's a great story. That's the stuff of drama, isn't it? No one wants to see someone standing in front of a room, didactically yakking at a kid, about how to be great. We need to see that earning. We need to see that earning process. And it doesn't have to be in every movie or TV show or song or commercial. But um, you know, in some of the ones that transcend time, and think about it, CK, the narratives that have lasted for centuries,
Mhm.
they're all about that. They're all about that.
So do you think because again, I'm projecting this, correct me if I'm incorrect. That you are someone who is all about mastery, agency, supporting others in service of the greater purpose. And here's actually one question our mutual friend Jan wants to ask. I totally forgot to ask last time. All right. So this is so how do you stay connected to your purpose as you become more successful and outside interests and influences also become larger?
In some ways, it prevents me from achieving the greatest heights,
Right. And hence
right?
why the conflict, right? So
Yeah,
he
yeah,
we want to know.
uh
So how do you do that?
sure. Um, look, I affiliate what you're talking about, to uh, to my identity as an artist. You know, um, uh, so um, a- art, um, any art that's going to last more than a minute, needs to emerge out of something that's burning inside you, and art is an expression of the combination of desire and pain and the need to express and the need to leave something behind to the world, to have an echo of yourself into the universe even beyond your passing, right? So um uh, you know I'm very fortunate in that I figured it out. I used the code and climbed the ladder, right? Education, action, education, action, education, action, as brought to me from Sherlock Holmes and Mr. Spock and Kiter and all the things that made me what I am, Gandalf. Um, uh, but other people aren't so fortunate. And I know how they feel, CK. They're suffering. Um, they're coming to harm. They're unable to see the bars of the cages around them. They're not able to lift themselves up through the trap door in the ceiling. So, so if I empathize with that pain, it shouldn't ought to be. That's a kid who is suffering. What else am I supposed to do? I have to dedicate some part of every day of my life to impacting uh, that potential audience, to get to them. I have no choice, and I ascribe that to my role as an artist, right? So I don't. How can I forget? No matter how much money you wave at me, you have to accept this about who I am and what I'm trying to do. If you don't, I'm not really interested in working with you. And I've turned down some super big paying jobs, for that reason. So my advice to Jan and everyone else is find that. Find the thing that you are willing to stake your life on,
Mm.
um, because it's vital. It's not just important to you; it's vital to the world. Um, and never forget it. It's got to be strong enough for you to think every day when you wake up. Here's the situation. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. I mean, I don't know if you know what I do as a profession. I'm a purpose coach.
Little bit.
So
Quite sure.
oftentimes people come to me after they have effectively compromised the non-negotiables, their soul, this essence of who they are for money, power, influence, etc., etc. Then they come to me and they realize something's missing, something's hollow. I'm now depressed. I don't know. I don't want to go to work anymore, no matter how much they pay me. Oh, okay, great. Here is the cost of what you did, essentially. So
Yeah.
what you're reinforcing is the stories that I happen to connect with quite a bit, in my
Mhm.
profession. And it's beautiful that you articulated that you have clarity about your non-negotiable, the essence of who you are. That's just you're unwilling to compromise, no matter how seductive the deals
I
to
welcome
you.
you to try,
Huh?
but
Very good.
I welcome people to try.
But
No, no,
the test continues, right? Maybe in the beginning is a little bit,
every
but
day.
then, as you escalate, it becomes more and more
Sure, sure,
seductive,
absolutely.
right? So
And it can be. I coach as well. I use my narrative based process to coach, and I have a little bit of a specialty in talking with uh, people who are on the autism spectrum or have other kinds of neurodivergent issues. Um, uh, Somehow I vibe with them, and uh, that's very satisfying too, because not only does it help who I'm talking to, but it reinforces those things and reminds me, every so often of what it is that allows me to function and allows me to kind of crystallize, um, what I do in the micro, because without the micro, you can't get the cosmic.
actually, on that note, since you mentioned our cosmic, and then you mentioned cosmology way, earlier, do you think that it's important for ones to clarify whether cosmology, what their frame of reality is, so that they can live their life with purpose, with meaning, with joy, and then step by step moving towards and then reinforcing this identity inside of this grand cosmology?
The answer is absolutely. Um, Absolutely. This notion of orientation, y you know, means where do I fit in the universe? Um, and, um, and that has a lot to do with dismantling, um, preconceived narratives. That's a part of the coaching that I do, and by the way, also, it's how we work with these gigantic, entertainment properties, video games and comic books and movies and such, which is, here's the way you've been thinking about yourself or your brand or your movie universe, and, you've been thinking about it because of preconceived notions which generally hinge themselves on some kind of traumatic incident in the past, right? So if it's a giant movie studio, it's well, there have been lean times and you've lost a lot of money, and we're worried about this. So we're going to bend this intellectual property in ways that move away from its foundational mythic principles because we don't want to go broke. That's trauma based there. For a person that I'm talking to, they have a set cosmology in their mind, their story, and their story is based on their experience. But what I've learned, CK, is that your experience is not rational. Your experience is reactionary. You're reacting to things that happen to you that cause you to be scared that they'll happen again. And so your reaction to that fear is to behave in a highly singular fashion all the time, looking around for evidence that it could happen again.
Mhm.
That's no way to live. That's very limiting. You're moving through a tube instead of having the agency to go in any direction you please.
Mhm.
You know, and so by removing the tube, and reminding you of your specific purpose, which is an inversion. of your reaction to the trauma. You get purpose and freedom all at the same time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. I love that. Jeff, actually, I have another friend who I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
So, you're someone who is well versed in the transmedia space, right? If you were to talk to someone who is developing, who has aspiration, or is developing a large scale universe and book series, potential games, films, comic books, how would you advise them to give them the best shot to build it successfully?
Here's the first question I ask, and no one can answer it.
Hmm.
Almost no one I talk to who's doing this can answer it.
Hmm.
What are you trying to say?
Hmm.
Give it to me in one sentence, and do not tell me the plot of your story.
Hmm.
It's very hard
Hmm.
because as creators, we get caught up in the narrative conceits
Hmm.
and in my take on the genre and and how the character goes from here to there. So all of that always creeps into to what are you trying to say? And what I want you to do is strip away the the fantasy, strip away the plot, go all the way down, and tell me what is concerning you so much that you're going to spend years and years of your life communicating this to others. You know, if it's because you have a cool character, and if it's because you have a wild battle or an incredible villain, you're gone. You're going to lose,
Hmm.
uh, because all of that is trimming on the tree.
Hmm.
I'm asking you what the trunk is, because if you don't believe, if you don't understand crystal clear what that is, then all of that stuff has been done a million times before. You know, the thing I'm working on for Disney has been done a million times before. But what matters to me is the code
Yeah.
that's in this tree trunk. I don't see this around much, and I need, and it's me. You know, it's a manifestation of myself and my partner, Ashley Eckstein, and that's what we're protecting. You can put some different uh, ornaments on the tree. That's fine as far as I'm concerned. You know, and it will take those kinds of creative compromises to create a transmedia universe. You better be prepared for that. Um, it's not going to be exactly what your fantasy of it is going to be, because someone's investing hundreds of millions of dollars into it. You know, your novel will come closest of it. So understand that, and then understand it to be the DNA that is infused into every aspect of your universe. And then we can start talking about character and events and gadgets and monsters and what the magic system's like and all that sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot to unpack there.
Yes.
On the cursory level, it makes sense. Well, Jeff, we're coming to. I mean, I love to talk to you forever, but I also want to respect your time that we are allotted for.
Mhm.
So let me give your question back to you. What are you trying to say? Strip away all of the plots and the characters and
Yeah.
the beautiful things. What I think I get what you're trying to say, but what do you? I want to ask you that question point blank. What are you trying to say?
Um, what I'm trying to say is um, that if we deeply understand listening, um, it will make us capable of reconciling with one another as a human race, and then it will enable us to repair our damaged global systems. If we can just hear each other out, um, uh, just talk with our ears, um, we can fix this. And and that is something that has haunted me since I was a little kid. So it's what I've always been trying to say.
Yeah. Well, actually, I have a follow-up question. So if
Oh,
if you can say, knowing what you know today, you can go back to talk to the young Jeff who was being bullied, what would you say to him?
First of all, I'd say it's going to be all right. And second of all, I'd tell him what you're seeing is not real. And if it's not real, you can forge a reality that will liberate you from this, and will free you from the trap you've set in your mind. Um, you can bend reality to your will. All you have to do is listen.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for how you showed up on Normal Warrior. I really I want to take a moment to acknowledge you for a few things. Um, I really appreciate your mission to use narrative, the story as a way for force for good, to helping people reconcile their internal struggles, their external struggles, to bring more love and harmony in the world. And that much I get. For me, that's what you're trying to say. And I really appreciate how you live that. Thank you.
Hey, visit me on LinkedIn. By the way, I'm at Jeff Gomez on LinkedIn. If you're interested in this kind of discussion and this kind of talk, uh, uh, I'll certainly be amplifying this podcast because it was truly a superior experience. So thank you.